to the Aboriginal channel. This episode will be another part to Aboriginal forts and castles. So in this episode, I'm going to introduce two new forts that I haven't previously talked about. But before I get into that, I'm going to do a small recap and show you a few of the forts that I already covered so that you have an idea of how widespread the Indian architecture ranged from, which was pretty much all over the Western Hemisphere. So down here in Texas, right down here, there's a place called Brownsville, and there's a fort called Fort Brown that looked like this. It basically has 6 diamond-shaped sides to it. Fort Brown in Texas, 1853. That would be right down here on the Civil War's battles map. And I showed you a fort in a previous video that was located right over here in Florida called Fort St. Augustine, which looks like this. It has those 4 diamond shape on each angle, on each corner of the building. I also discovered a fort that used to be right there that has the outlining right here by these battles in Alabama called Fort Toulouse. And this is an aerial view of the frame that used to be there, but it's not anymore. And it has the same exact diameters as the fort over in St. Augustine, Florida. So those are 3 of the forts that I've previously covered. So from there, we're going to go. I've covered forts all along the Gulf Coast and also all along the East Coast right here, all the way up to North Carolina. And here we covered some forts. Now we're going to be making our way up. So these next 2 forts I'm covering, one is right here where there were Civil War battles at in Maryland and Washington County called Fort Frederick. And it basically looked like this. It says right here at jeffersonpatterson.wordpress.com, I found in an article, it has a reconstructed Fort Frederick right here. And as you can see, it has those same diamond-shaped angles right there. The next fort is going to be way up here in Rhode Island, right here, which is way up here, Rhode Island right there. And there's a state park right there called Fort Adams State Park. And the fort there looks like this, way up in Rhode Island. But going back over to Fort Frederick State Park, right here on its Wikipedia page, it says that the fortification was active in the French and Indian War in between 1754 and 1763, and the American Revolutionary War in 1775 through 1783. And presumably at both of those wars, Indians were fighting for their land and their territory, and presumably lost it in the American Revolutionary War. But remember, everything is speculative and presumptuous. So right down here it says that French and Indian War under the history says Fort Frederick was built in 1756 to 57 by the colony of Maryland. That's a lie. It says during the French and Indian War in 1756, says the money was appropriated and authorized by the Maryland legislature at the request of Governor Horatio Sharp to build the fortification on the frontier. So that's a lie. But I wanted to point out the fact that they know how much money was authorized for the building of the fort is a reoccurrence when you go and read these. And that's the one thing that lets you know that it's a flat out lie. Under the history of the Fort Adams Fort in Rhode Island, it says that the Secretary of War's report of December 1811 describes the fort as an irregular star fort of masonry. Now, if they had been building all these forts with all these different star shapes from way back in the 1600s, the Secretary of War in his 1811 report would not have described the fort as an irregular star fort with an irregular indented work of masonry adjoining it. See, irregular, that lets you know that they didn't build it. So even though a lot of these Wikipedia pages has a bunch of bogus, false information, you can always find a diamond in the rough that lets you know what you need to know. So over here, I found an article that says 6 historic structures in America that were built by slaves. Number 1 is the state capitol building right here, where it has those stairways on either side, pillars in the middle, pillars all around, with the guy up there standing on that eminence. Now it's all basically American Indian structural engineering, but we'll move down because there's one in particular that we need to look at because it's the diamond in the rough, which is right here, railroads. It says according to to USA Today, all four major railroad networks in North America, North Fork, Southern, CSX, Union Pacific, and Canadian National, own lines that were built and operated with the labor of enslaved black people. Not only did many slaves constructed these railways, but they also ran them. In previous videos, I was trying to get down to the bottom of whether or not so-called black, so-called American Indians built and had railroads in the United States before it was completely engulfed by European invasion. And this right here is a bit of correlation to that. But let's go down and look at the rest of the 6 on this list just to give us an idea of what so-called slaves were building. This one is Thomas Jefferson's estate at Monticello and other presidential estates. So they built this one and others. It has the pillars, it's built of bricks, and it has the top part where you can basically stand up there, then the dome part at the top, of course. This one right here is very interesting. It says several buildings at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. According to reports, as one of the nation's oldest public universities, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill has a long history of slave labor. Not only were many of its buildings built with the hands of slaves and some free black people, but many enslaved black people were servants to students. The memorial was installed in 2005. 300 figurines based on 3 larger bronze sculptures support the memorial. The central part of the memorial acts as a table and contains this inscription. The class of 2002 honors the university's unsung founders, the people of color bound and free who helped build the Carolina that we cherish today. Now, these are all diamonds in the rough, but let's look at this next one. Number 5, Wall Street. The very name Wall Street is born of slavery, with enslaved Africans building a wall in 1653 to protect Dutch settlers from Indian raids. Pause. But we know what they really mean when they say enslaved Africans. Those are enslaved Indians. This walkway and wooden fence made up of pointed logs and running river to river later were known as Wall Street, the home of world finance. Enslaved and free Africans were largely responsible for the construction of the early city, first by clearing land, then by building a fort, mills, bridges, stone houses, the first city hall, the docks, the city prison, Dutch and English churches, the city hospital, and Furnace's Tavern. At the corner of Wall Street and Broadway, they helped erect Trinity Church. Lastly, the White House, which also has the pillars and the balcony, says PolitiFact reports enslaved people quarried and cut the rough stone that was later dressed and laid by Scottish masons to erect the walls of the president's house. The slaves joined a workforce that included local white laborers and artisans from Maryland and Virginia, as well as immigrants from Ireland, Scotland, and other European nations. That's all a lie. Nobody built it but the so-called blacks, so-called slaves, so-called American Indians. More than likely, these things were already built and already owned by hierarchies of Indian nations. And when conflict and war took place, the aftermath was the results of the invading colonists claiming to have had these buildings built when they already pretty much existed there. One other interesting fact back over here at Fort Adams, that's up in Rhode Island, says in the 1870s it had an upgrade. In previous video, I spoke to the fact that in the so-called Reconstruction era in the 1870s, a lot of things were going on. And that's basically when they had full control of all the land, was after the Civil War. And this right here is a bit of correlation to that, where all the way up in Rhode Island, they were giving things upgrades, which they could have already given upgrades decades before the 1870s, unless, of course, certain factors made them incapable of doing so. Now let's look at some of the notable people that's involved, associated with Fort Adams, way up in Rhode Island. So you got Franklin Pierce right here, dude that's got his hand in his coat. John Magruder, this guy got his hands in his coat. William Rosecrans right there. You got Henry Jackson Hunt, he got his hand in his coat. Robert Anderson got his hand in his coat. Those were all Northern Union Army officials back in the day, but they have a Confederate Civil War general associated with this Fort Adams way up in Rhode Island, and another Civil War general associated with Fort Adams way up in Rhode Island. Through the history books, which has all been a lie, so therefore If it's a lie, then what's the truth? If it's a lie, then what's the